All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the People and Dance Floors podcast. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Michael Nill. Hi, Michael.
Hi there, you're right.
Good. Michael is the CEO of the Nighttime Industries Association. And this is an organization, is a trade association and membership organization. And basically, the NTIA is all about promoting the contribution of nighttime industries in the UK and internationally, primarily the contribution to the UK economy, but also thinking about the kind of cultural contribution of nighttime industries, clubs and venues, and other types of businesses. So I'm just really excited to have you because we haven't had much of a chance on the People and Dance Floors podcast to explore the more kind of cultural and economic contribution of nighttime industry and associated venues. So we are really excited to be able to talk about that a little bit more with you. But before we do that, I guess I always like to start with the personal and starting at the beginning. So perhaps you could tell me a little bit more about how you became involved with the NTIA.
No, lovely, and thank you for having me on. I mean, I started, I suppose, back in the early days working on the bars in some of the sort of smaller nightclub venues, traditional venues in the sort of early 90s. So I'm not a youngster. I've been through the mill. I've had my own venue. I've worked pretty much everywhere, including being a spotter on the door. Used to run dance music venues, was a drum and bass promoter for a while. And then I worked at executive level in a marketing department for a blue chip company with regard to late night economy. And then moved my way forward. And I got an opportunity to come in and work with the NTIA because I felt that I wanted to give something back. So got involved in the infrastructure and then things developed and now I've sort of been thrust into the limelight a little bit with regard to representation and, and kind of relish the opportunity to develop personally, but also, take on quite a big responsibility in terms of being a bit more of a vocal person and a representative for our members, not only as an activist, but also a political lobbyist, which we work very hard with the different different departments within government. So, very, very tough time for everyone at the moment. But, for us, we've really been able to go out and show how important it is to be a collective and talk with one voice. And I think many of the trade bodies have really come together and developed and understood how important it is for the government in particular to start understanding and recognizing the value, not only economically and culturally, but also the community value of some of the venues and cultural outputs that we have up and down the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that you mentioned about working in bars and nighttime venues and doing promotion and being a music lover, which is great. It's music to my ears, but also I think that the kind of the kind of development and growing up aspect of your pathway or your trajectory. And ending up in kind of an advocacy role, because really a lot of what you do is advocacy, activism, lobbying, and so on. So I was wondering, how have you found the past year and a half, where I guess, the kind of political activism of the NTIA has become much more, or has had to become much more forceful as a result of COVID and the fact that nighttime industry venues and businesses have been practically ignored by the government.
It's an interesting one. I mean, initially we were, I think everyone, when this all sort of started, felt that it was going to be 2 or 3 months and then it would subside and we'd get back into it. January, we were all sat around thinking this is a third world issue and it's not going to reach our shores. Come March, we started getting locked down. Obviously, we had the Prime Minister say don't go to pubs, clubs, bars, theatres, etc., which was, absolutely jaw-dropping for most people. And we've been going through these cycles of sort of disbelief and belief over a period of time, understanding where government has gone, and we've had to be very strong to ensure that we've got the support, or as much support as we can galvanise from the government. But one clear thing that's happened over the last 12 months is actually our understanding of how little the government knows about our industry and the different nuances and the decision making that, although it's been advised against, it's continued to do in terms of policy. So I think moving forward from here, one of the biggest lessons is to ensure that we educate, not only in the immediate sort of role that we have, but also we start to future-proof the representation at national and regional government level. Because they, even the cultural department in DCMS have little or no understanding of club culture or electronic music in any way, shape or form. The live sector, because it traditionally has an affinity with classic arts, is slightly easier to digest. But definitely the electronic music, that contemporary music culture, which is so prevalent in this country, is just not something that's considered as, I wouldn't say desirable, but not as considered as some of the other genres and cultures that are quite obvious in terms of DCMS. So we've got a big job in terms of education and representation and having our own voice.
Yeah, I mean, it really strikes me that, because I've literally got no understanding about whether and to what extent any elements of government or even certain MPs who may not be involved in executive decision making have any understanding about the community and cultural importance of electronic dance music to this country. And I think maybe this was historically the case also, but it didn't matter as much to the extent that we didn't have a pandemic crisis on our hands, and therefore, we could still keep going, even though the government would turn their backs and not necessarily care about what was going on. But what we have seen, certainly what I have observed, is this kind of, I guess, decrease in interest in allowing, especially small venues, in allowing them to exist and to thrive in a lot of kind of inner city areas. Obviously, as a result of maybe, I don't know, a combination of gentrification, NIMBYism, as well as maybe I don't know, just councils not being interested. Because I mean, local authorities and local councils as well are not, there's not great representation of diversity, of diverse culture, of young people. A lot of local councils are made up of older people who, again, it's that connection with maybe a more traditional kind of cultural heritage in the form of museums or classical music, but not so much the connection with, I guess, younger thing you've seen.
I think it's become more prevalent. I think that the challenge that we have and interests from a regional basis is subjective. It's depend on the people in power. There isn't a consistent movement to support classic arts or contemporary music or festivals and events, and we're seeing that very clearly now that there is a there's almost there's a belief that it will be bounced back in a different form and those spaces will be taken up, and sadly that's not going to save jobs and people's livelihoods and the things that they've worked for years. I mean, the one thing I would say is they've really got to consider why people get into our industry. It's like being a footballer in some respects. You get into football because you have a passion for football. You get into our scene and our industry because you have a passion for music, you have a passion for creating, whether you're a DJ, production, whether you're, involved in a part-time job, you get in there for that social engagement as much as anything else. And it becomes a lifestyle. And this is the piece that they don't understand. So just to rip that away from people and say it can't exist anymore, go and do something else is shameful at best.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that campaign was, when they launched that campaign, and it was just you just got to retrain, it's fine. And you're just what? You're just denying an identity, an entire social network, and without any kind of understanding or concern. It was just a bit, insensitive to say the least.
Hugely.
So I guess, I think, my next thing is really to kind of talk a little bit about how whether and how this kind of generational clash or generational kind of divide that exists between kind of like, younger people who, I guess it's weird because younger people, obviously, you get involved in the scene while young, you're passionate, like you were saying, but then, actually, like there's a lot of also older people who are involved in the scene, but maybe they just don't have enough political power or clout to be able to be taken seriously. It's almost as if like people are dismissed if they're still involved in that culture because it's a young person's thing to do. You're supposed to grow out of it somehow. Yeah, I don't know.
It's an interesting perspective. I mean, look, I think as you start to get older, that it becomes more refined. Less and less people of certain age groups are involved, and the biggest challenge that you have is, as you quite rightly say, you've got other responsibilities. You're potentially not getting your core income from that type of business unless you've stuck with it. And you're much more acute, much more committed at a younger age because you haven't got the responsibilities of bills and mortgages and all the other bits that go along with it. So I think the interesting part, and we've summed it up like this, is the average age of a councillor that makes decisions for licenses for cultural sort of businesses, whether you're a venue, nightclub, live music space, is 65 years old. So when you think about it like that, then we've got a real problem with people having an affinity or an understanding of exactly what our industry means. And that average age, not to take away, because there are some that very much love it and they want to be engaged and they're surrounded by family of that age and want to support. But the majority, it's almost like a risk-averse environment that they're walking into, fueled with policing and that side. They tend to not account for the culture or the PSED or the equality impact of not putting on these cultures. So they tend to go with risk averse, which is very police. So there's a big piece of education that needs to come about for decision makers in local authorities and licensing committees to give them an understanding of what culture of today looks like. And then the second part of this is to encourage people of certain age groups to get engaged in representation or political position, and that's going to take a few cycles of politics to get through. So, education is key, both on a regional and a national level, but we also need to consider representation. We can't move forward unless we affect the cycle of representation for people of a broader age group in politics rather than a very acute age group in politics, which potentially haven't got that affinity with our sector.
Exactly, and you just more diverse representation is key from every angle, including generational as well. So yeah, I guess related to that, in terms of the kind of divisions that exist around generations, I was thinking, well, part of me, as my work has explored through the People and Dance Floors project, this kind of dynamic that exists in terms related with drug use and people's kind of using drugs in the context of nighttime venues and clubs acutely during a particular sort of phase of their lives, and then sort of slowly growing out of drugs, and that's well backed up by research, that kind of trajectory. And again, that's something that I've sort of found in speaking with participants to the project, as well as like sort of people on the podcast before. So I was wondering whether, to what extent you think that the kind of drug issue is something that I guess it appears as problematic and therefore prevents making headway in terms of nighttime culture being accepted as good culture. So if the drug issue taints the nighttime venues and clubs, to be able to be accepted, by a more traditional conservative kind of UK culture.
It's interesting. I mean, look, I always say drug culture is a societal thing, whether you talk about tobacco, whether you talk about alcohol, or whether you talk about illegal drugs, which, many are aware, whatever class they are. The challenge that you have always is nighttime economy has always been the sort of naughty boy on the step, or the naughty girl on the step, as it were, because it's seen as a resource drain, particularly for things like policing and the cleanup and all this. This is why we've had things like late night levies put in, because you know, it's very clear that they are suggesting that we need an extraordinary level of policing and maintenance to ensure that, you know, the nighttime economy is catered for. Hence the reason why businesses after midnight are asked to contribute. We have a bigger societal issue in terms of drugs. It's not just nighttime economy, day, evening, night, all parts of it, whether you talk about people and recreational drugs. But one of the things I always say about this is, look, if they can't stop it getting into prisons and the police with their powers can't stop it, there is only a certain level that we can go to ensure or to contribute to ensuring that drugs aren't getting into our spaces or our venues. With that in mind, there has to be some considerations in terms of maybe turning a different way to try and remedy this position, and that is somewhat societal. That's somewhat about creating an education platform similar to the Loop that I know we've discussed in the past, but also having some sort of way of managing it to the point that it's, you know, one of the challenges are at the moment is because of the illegal nature of it, it's hidden. So, you know, what's worse, whether it's hidden and, you know, that environment then creates something that's quite illicit, where, you know, that hidden environment looks at things like addiction, and looks at all of these things which are hidden, and even to families now, there are people that, you know, whether they're addicted to alcohol, tobacco, you know, cannabis, etc., get themselves to a point where, you know, it's almost hidden from families. So even people very close to them are very difficult. So, you know, we've got quite an uphill battle. So I think we've got to think a little bit outside of the box in terms of trying to either manage this or, you know, find all the contributory factors so that we can not solve, but limit the impact of this and educate as effectively as possible. And, you know, as you quite rightly know, I mean, the testing sites that happen within the festivals up and down the country, some that were accepted, I know the Met weren't happy with it at all because they couldn't see the difference between black and white and law and unlawful. With the likes of Manchester, which are a little bit more future thinking, they were sat there saying, look, we can't resolve this, so let's try a different route and see if we can manage it differently and see what the effects are. And I think that's very brave, and it has its challenges like everything else. But, you know, for me, you know, the drugs thing is a contributory factor. It is difficult, alcohol being one of the key ones, because of the behavioural position. And we are suffering from that now with regard to COVID, because the government looks at alcohol as a behaviour changer. And because of that behavioural change, that's why they're very worried about reopening the likes of nightclubs and bars, etc. And they're further down the line, because as far as they're concerned, if they can't control behaviour, then, you know, the COVID environment becomes, you know, a lot less safer.
Yeah, it's of course it's a real issue, isn't it? Because most drugs that are used in those contexts, particularly alcohol, are well, obviously widely used. I mean, essentially, the nighttime economy is dependent on drugs. You know, whether you obviously primarily again alcohol, but also other kind of stimulant drugs that might be used in the context of clubs. So, you know, the nighttime economy wouldn't, in my reading, it wouldn't be as thriving and as like as pumping as it is, as it would be normally in non-COVID times, if it wasn't for it being drug fueled to some extent. And obviously that brings its challenges, but I think for me it's a reality. It's just how it is in my observation. So of course, you know, it's about what, you know, what is the most important, you know, what should be the most important outcome of a strategy. It should be to keep people safe. It should be to reduce the harms. It should be to, you know, enable people to kind of obviously maybe lose their inhibitions a little bit, but not to the point of maybe harming other people or harming themselves at least. And maybe some drugs, you know, again like alcohol, are particularly bad for things like fueling certain violent behaviors and things like that, you know, and historically always have been. So yeah, so that obviously it is a big challenge, and I see the difference in terms of, you know, certain places where drug testing, for example, has been approved and has been done and piloted. But yeah, it's a big challenge, isn't it? It's a big challenge. I don't really know what the solution is unless we're looking at sort of more significant kind of policy changes. But I don't think clubs are in a bit of a catch-22, aren't they? Because on the one hand, they have to adopt this kind of zero tolerance line, but on the other hand, realistically, they can't really enforce a zero tolerance policy, not to a I don't know, can they? I mean, I never see that.
I think any operator will sit around the table and say they do everything they can to stop it as a zero tolerance, but there is only so far you can go. And as I said, if prison officers can't stop it coming in, and policemen can't stop it, or the police force as a whole can't stop it happening in society, then we have limited or effect on stopping it happening. Mm-hmm. And this begs the question: is what's the right approach? And you quite rightly say that. Is it about harm reduction? Is it about, decriminalization? Is it, what's the stance? What's going to have the biggest impact in terms of saving lives? Is it education? I know education has been a big part of the plight for many years now. Has it stopped the, people taking drugs? Without a doubt, it hasn't. Our quest is, right, how do we get to the best position that we can to not compromise people? I don't think, it's not easy. There isn't just one solution. The criminalization of it makes it go underground and makes it hidden. Decriminalization makes it go above ground to a point. But, do you want, no one wants that either. So it's a very challenging environment. I don't think we're ever going to be in a position where we're going to win without any doubt. But, we fight on and we do the best that we can as operators. But, it's like I say, if the police can't manage it to the point that they're effective, then, there is only so much the operators, the door staff, etc., are going to be able to do to ensure that it doesn't get in. And that's the challenge that you have, is what's the direction of travel? Or do we need to think outside the box? And I think the Loop have taken a step forward that way. I think they've broken some barriers. I'm yet to see, anything moving forward from there. But we know Fiona Measham very well, and she's done a fantastic job. She's, in Australia and different countries as well. They've received it very well. Is it going to give us the answers we need? It's actually looking at it from a different perspective, which I think is very valuable. How we progress it from there, that's the next question. And even, I haven't got those answers. I sit around the table thinking, is this the best way, or which direction do we need to go? It's not easy for anybody.
Yeah, I feel like maybe some of the clubs and promoters might want to go in a completely different direction, but they just don't have the power to do anything differently, because they have so many different stakeholders that they need to kind of work with and compromise with. And therefore, even if they do want to be more innovative, you got the example of Manchester earlier, it was only possible because other stakeholders kind of agreed to go ahead and experiment with drug testing, for instance, in that case. So yeah, it's tough. But yeah, I mean, I just think, obviously, I don't want to say that I've got all the answers, but what I'd like to see going forward is for, I guess, harm reduction and safety and inclusion to be at the core, or the core values and principles that I guess organize, or around which we organize the nighttime economy and drug policy too. So yeah, and I'd like to see kind of drug policy organizations and advocacy organizations work together with nighttime industries, businesses, venues, as well as promoters, and all the stakeholders kind of working together to be able to find solutions that work for everyone. That's my utopia.
And I think that's a really important thing, and I think that's happening now, without a doubt. I mean, the very sad story is Sarah Everhart. We went through that process of vulnerability and etc. And we saw the story come out about non-uniform police officers walking through venues. But as we highlighted, that's one part of a puzzle. I mean, we already are well regulated, and what happened with Sarah was that she was out in the public domain, the public realm, which for us presented other issues. So there is a lot of work to do on many fronts, from vulnerability, which can be a result of alcohol and the other sort of components. But I think the key thing here is, you're right, it's harm reduction is a part of it, vulnerability, making sure that it's very clear. I mean, I've been in venues where I've had people who have overdosed. I've been in venues where people have drunk too much, and the care that you have to give them is from venue to home. This is quite significant sort of time. So that's the last thing that we want to see, and we don't want to see people in that much of a state that they're unable to manage themselves. And some of that's education, some of that people can't control them, some of that's addiction. So it's not an easy environment for anyone to work, and it's definitely a character builder, I'll tell you that now.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of strikes me that again, there's with certain substances, I mean, an uncontrolled underground, unregulated drug market will always have nasty surprises, will always present nasty surprises in the form of like too potent drugs or adulterated drugs or whatever. And also, I think although alcohol is a well accepted, culturally well accepted, sometimes even glorified substance, it can lead to very serious harm. Again, not just in general in terms of addiction, but also in the context of like acute toxicity, for example. So all of those things. Obviously a part of me is like, but I wish that in the, again, utopia future, I wish that I could go to a club and maybe buy some mushrooms or something. That sounds to me like, although of course I know it's I think it's class B, or I don't know. Anyway, it's an illegal substance, but it comparatively presents less risk. So it's like, it's about, for me anyway, in the future, it's about also providing choices to consumers about which substances they want to use other than alcohol.
And I hear what you're saying. I mean, look, the challenge that we have at the moment is it's a challenge enough dealing with alcohol. And I can tell you, for 25 years of experience, and the cycle of going from acid house all the way through to today, it's very difficult to keep up with drug use. And what is here today was very different 20 years ago, and each year it sort of evolves. But a lot of the challenges around alcohol being mixed with drugs, and people just being a little bit careless. Well, I wouldn't say a little bit, massively careless a lot of the time, and that's what creates these sort of challenges. So I understand what you're saying with regards to choice, but you've also got to consider the fact that some of these people get to a point where they're out of control and not able to manage themselves, which presents risk on their part, but also risk in terms of having to have someone look after them. And that's about having some personal responsibility as well. So, if we go down to the very clear basics of alcohol, even alcohol, people get to a point where they're just so out of control, they're having to be managed and sat with. Whether you're a police officer, or whether you're a member of door staff, or whether you're a member of staff within a venue, that takes people away from what they're doing job wise, and it doesn't help businesses.
Yeah, of course. It's resource intensive.
Yeah, so I think the challenge that you have with all of this is, I think if you ask the operators, I think they'd be all sat around saying, I'm not really sure that would present a multitude of issues. In terms of how people manage themselves, we see that just through alcohol on its own, that people can't manage themselves. And the other challenge with it is alcohol is something that we understand. When you come to drugs, the mixes and changes of use and all those different concoctions can create so many different medical issues, not let alone the underlying medical issues of people. It causes concern. And
it just opens up a Pandora's box of so many different potential, people presenting with so many different issues that people door staff they're not, or even medically trained people are not prepared to or are not capable of dealing with.
Unless they know what people have taken, it becomes very, very difficult. You then have to understand what the underlying medical issues are, and those decisions have got to be made very quickly. And I don't think it's fair that people within our industry have to take that responsibility on, because it's a very difficult environment. Hence the reason why, I understand the intervention element that the Loop have, and I understand some of those, and I think that's really important, and it's an interesting perspective to approach. But we have those multiple challenges that if we open up the floodgates, then we're going to have some bigger issues that, because people can't take personal responsibility for themselves. They can't do it with alcohol, let alone anything else.
Yeah, there is really a thing about, it's, I guess, another division between the responsible consumer and the consumer who, for whatever reason, can't take responsibility. Maybe not always, but maybe on that occasion, and then opens up a whole set of risks and necessities and resources.
I mean, no one wants to sort of stop people doing what they want to do or enjoying themselves. But, if you think about it, there's a range of things. There's people being irresponsible, and then there's also people that are not being irresponsible, that have potentially been spiked or taken something that wasn't right, and all of those sort of components come out. So for me, it creates some dangerous environments where you're actually putting people's life in other people's hands. That, if you're a member of security and you're being paid £12 an hour, and your job is, within those sort of environments, is to protect and serve people and make sure that they're all right, and safety. Imagine the pressure on top of that, alongside that being something which was quite openly done. It's a concern. It's a concern for managers. It's a concern for a lot of people. So that's where, and that's outside of alcohol or anything like that. So for me, that's a challenging environment. And like I say, if the police can't manage it, and we talk about our prisons being fortified environments, and they can't manage it, how are we supposed to manage it in the environment? We do the best that we can. We have the best staff on we can. They're very well trained, but it still gets in. You can't take away from that.
Indeed. So it makes, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and it's a very balanced view. Thank you. The last question that I've got for you is a question that I've sort of been asking everyone about their utopian vision. So I guess, what would be your utopian vision for the future in terms of the nighttime industry? And obviously you can connect that answer to some of the things that you're already doing with the NTIA.
Well, look, I mean, I have a very clear vision for us, and I think it's based around the key stakeholders and decision makers having a very clear understanding of the economic, culture and community value of not only hospitality businesses, but nighttime economy, late night trade, nightclubs, etc., from a perspective of what they give to communities, that cost versus benefit position. Also the fact that they are a release for people. And from a community perspective, we've seen massively over the last 12 months is how much they do in terms of food banks and opening the doors to people, and that sort of lone elderly person that it's their sort of main route to social engagement. But also for us, it's actually understanding how important the likes of club culture and electronic music and live music is to the UK as a whole. And for a small island, we have a phenomenal output of talent. That doesn't just come as DJs and performers, that comes as production, supply chain, and the many industry jobs that are out there, from security through to draymen that deliver the beer. But the fact of the matter is, and I think the biggest and the most important thing that we need to do is make sure that we've got an individual voice, and we have substantiated claim over what our economic value is, and we keep beating the drum, probably one of the most important cultural contributors to the UK. And I want to say it like this: most of our industry in terms of electronic music and in terms of that live music element is from the streets upwards. It's not something that's been spoon-fed from the top down. This has been a collaboration of artists and creatives over 30, 40 years coming together to create a movement which is phenomenal and has become world renowned. So what I want for everyone who's contributed to it over the last 40 years is for them to be recognized and for the value to be completely understood. And that education process is part of that. But on top of that, what we need to do is start celebrating the culture that we have created. And we need to start making sure that communities understand the value of what we are, and also that they understand how much we contribute. So that when we get to things like the equality side of things and looking at different music genres, we need that community to start to understand why they're so important. You know, why grime music, drill, and all of these outputs are really, really important for some of these communities to be part of. So for me, it's all about education, recognition, and value. If we can contribute by doing that over the next 5 to 10 years, then I would be in a happy place to understand that without a doubt the NTIA and all of the people that work with me have contributed to a point that we've actually changed the output of an industry which has for a long time been underestimated.
Mm. Yeah, that was great. Thank you. That actually has made me a bit emotional because the reason why I'm Italian, I'm not British, obviously, and the reason why I stayed in the UK after having come here for education was because of the music culture. So that was the one thing that I guess I think I understood on an emotional level that it was a revolutionary thing, and it was a grassroots thing, and it was a bottom up thing, and it just made me feel like the culture of resistance and revolution that the UK has, a lot of it is expressed through the music culture. And yeah, so I got into jungle and etc. But anyway, it's a thing for me, and I can really see I can see it. I can see my experience in your words. So thank you.
No problem, and thank you. It's like you say, it's exciting times. Although the pandemic has created a very, very sad period for people who've lost their lives and people who've been ill and lost time, it's also for many industries created somewhat of a ground zero. And that ground zero comes with recognition and understanding of where they place themselves within, in terms of representation, but also allows them to start building with a very clear focus. Because once you strip everything out and you understand, once you're at rock bottom and you know there's nothing else out there and you can see who's standing by your side, you also know how you can move forward and who those people will be with standing with you. And I think that's one thing that we've learned very much so, is that there are a lot of people who talk well. There's a lot of people who are really keen to support the industry, but the real people who buy into it and understand it and have a passion for it, 12 months on, are still fighting for it, which is the big part that I think is important. And we've taken something bigger than anything away from this, which is a sense of community. Our industry has come together like nothing else.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. My biggest hope is that, this period of taking stock, this forced period of taking stock will mean a kind of a renaissance, right? That, in a good direction for everybody involved. All right. Well, thanks so much, Michael. This has been great. Real privilege to have you. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed our chat. And well, talk to you soon, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.